Cheers, mate. You know, the number one question I get asked is, why does God allow suffering to children? Often people will comment on my posts and they'll literally just put childhood cancer. That's it, game over. There cannot be a God, there's no more discussion, they finished. Now, it is a really emotive issue. It is a hard issue to come to terms with. But I think when people say, how can there be a God because children are suffering? They're obviously struggling to combine those two aspects. If God is a God of love, if he's a God who cares for us and created us, and yet at the same time something that seems so unjust and so painful, how can those two things marry up? Well, you know, the alternative for those who are atheists is actually worse. Because atheists such as Richard Dawkins will tell you that nature is not cruel, nature is just indifferent. When he talks about suffering, he says there's no good or evil, there's no cruel or kind. Nature is just callous, it's just indifferent. There is no meaning or purpose to our lives. Now, you tell me how that is not worse. Tell me that is not harsher to say to a poor little 6-year-old kid who is suffering with some horrendous disease. You go up to him and say, you know what, there is no God. Your suffering has no meaning, your life has no meaning, no purpose, it's just complete fluke, completely random, survival of the fittest. Sorry mate, there you go. That is far worse to say that to someone than to say what we as Christians believe, that despite your pain and your suffering, there is a God who cares for you. There's a God who loves you. There's a God who wants to come alongside you, who wants to be there in the pain. There's a God who understands how you feel, because Jesus himself was beaten, was tortured. He suffered horrendously, so much so that he gave up his life. God, his own son, died. God can relate to the pain that you and I feel, that he wants to be there to comfort, to strengthen us, to support us. You know, when my daughter was born, she almost died when she was 2 days old, and it was awful. I've prayed like I'd never prayed before, in agony, crying my eyes out, screaming, God, would you do something? He did a miracle. She's still alive today, 11 years later. But actually, in those painful moments, being in that hospital repeatedly and in the ambulance, was knowing God's love close and nearby. The alternative option that atheists would push, that there is no God because there is this disease amongst children, because there is suffering, is that your life is completely meaningless. I cannot see that is a better alternative than to say, despite your pain and suffering, there's a God who loves you and cares for you, and he wants to be with you through that pain. And actually, sometimes he can do a miracle and he can heal you from that illness you're suffering. I see that as a far better alternative.